8 surefire ways to improve managerial effectiveness. 8 certain ways to improve managerial effectiveness. I can remember many years ago as I began as a young manager, and I was searching for the key to success in management. I was looking everywhere I could possibly find, and then I saw a statement that said, successful managers have formed the habit of doing those things unsuccessful managers dislike doing and will not do. And I said, that's it. That's it. If I can form the habit of doing the right things as a manager, I can accomplish what I want to accomplish in my profession. Today in this session, we'll talk about 8 sure ways that you can form habits that will help you be a better and more effective manager. The first idea, we need to solve the paradox of time. What is the paradox of time? Well, we never seem to have enough time, yet we have all the time there is. Isn't that true? Now, I know you as a manager would say, man, if I could just have an extra hour in the day, I could get it all done. Just give me 1 extra hour in the day. There's not a way that I can do that. But I can share with you an example of a way that you can solve that paradox of time, because I remember, again, early in my career, I remember approaching every day, and as I came into the office and thought about the things that I had to do, I thought, well, I guess I thought it was much like this pitcher and all the water in it, and the water represented the things that I wanted to get done. And then this was my day. And I said, wait a minute, there's no way that I can get this all done. There's no way that I can possibly get everything that I want into this day. I said, this is going to be a frustrating day, and I'd start that day, and I'd get about to lunch, and I'd reassess. And I'd say, sure enough, I'm not going to get it all done today. I'm just not going to get it all done. I can't possibly get it all done. And along about getting close to the end of the day, sure enough, frustrating day. Absolutely frustrating. Now, I know you've all had that experience. But then, you know what I did? I looked around, and I noticed that there were other managers that had solved the paradox of time. You know how they solved it? They had a slightly different attitude than I had. They started out by saying, I can't get everything done today. But then they put a but by that, and they said, at least I can do the really important things. Wow, what a difference that made in my life. If you assume at the beginning you can't get everything done, but what's your job as a manager? It's not to get everything done. We can't possibly get everything done. What we need to do is make sure that we are spending our time getting the really important things done. One of the ways that we can do that is move to point 2. Point 2 is what I call to-do list failure. Have any of you experienced that? You know, you get back to the office and you say, I've got a lot to do. I'm going to prepare that to-do list. And so you do. You get 20 items on that to-do list. Now, here's an important question for you. Does the average individual in the first hour of the day get a lot of those things done or relatively few? I would suggest to you that most of us would end up getting a lot of things done the first hour. Because what happens? We want to cross things off on our list, don't we? And so we go for the things that are quick and that are easy and that are personal and that are fun and that are no we can cross off, and we say, boy, we made a lot of progress this first hour, didn't we? And about noon, maybe we got 10 of the items crossed off. And we're feeling great, and about the end of the day, 15 of the 20 items crossed off of our list, but then we look at the 5 that didn't get done. And they were the really important things. To-do list failure because we didn't do 2 things. We didn't, once we got that list completed, take just a little bit of time, and I'm not talking about a lot of time, I'm talking about just a little bit of time to prioritize, to decide what's really important, and then secondly, to do a little scheduling of our day so that we can truly accomplish those things that are important, because we're probably not going to get all the things on our list done. But your job as a manager is simply to make sure that you're doing the really important things by prioritizing and then by taking just a little bit of time to schedule your day. For instance, you as a manager might have a very important thinking project where it really needs your total concentration, no interruption. Best to schedule that at a time when you're not likely to be interrupted, or put yourself in an environment where you can't be interrupted. We need to plan and schedule that way. Now, another way that we can accomplish exactly the same thing is to move to point 3 here. I love the statement made by Lin Yatang, great Chinese philosopher. He said, besides the noble art of getting things done, there is the noble art of leaving things undone. And then he put the kicker on it. He said, the wisdom of life consists in the elimination of non-essentials. Oh, that's so true for us as managers. You see, if you want more time to do the important things, what do we need to do? We need to figure out what we're doing that has lesser importance and eliminate those items. They recently did a study of the CEOs, of the presidents of major corporations to try to determine what made them effective. You know what was the single thing that they found out that made them effective from a standpoint of their time use? They were able to eliminate non-essentials from their life, the things that weren't really important. I challenge you as managers to eliminate non-essentials. Now that's an interesting philosophy, but how do you do it from a practical standpoint? Let me suggest that there are at least 2 ways. One way is to look at what we call the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule. More appropriately, that's Pareto's principle. Many years ago, Pareto said, in any group of items, there will be a small percentage of the items that account for a large percentage of the value. The rest of the items account for a very small percentage of the value. You know that's true in your own organization. You think about the products or services that you provide. Probably your profitability comes primarily from a relatively small amount of items. Or you think about the people that you manage. And certainly there are a number of them that come to the top, and a very small percentage of them that get the greatest amount of work done. But nowhere is that principle, that 80-20 principle, more operative than in your own use of time as a manager. You see, I challenge you, if you kept track on a minute-by-minute basis and then analyzed, I think you would find that 20% of the time that you spent during the day accounted for 80% of your value. You want to be more effective? Simply analyze your day tomorrow and make sure you spend more time doing those things that are getting the greater value. There's a second way that you can eliminate non-essentials from your life. Do we have any perfectionists in the room? Other than myself. I see a lot of people raising their hand. I see a few people pointing at other people, so I know there are perfectionists in here. We have a problem. We perfectionists do. We want to do it right, don't we? There's a law called Parkinson's Law, which says work expands to the time available for its completion. Now that causes us perfectionists problems, because what we do is we say, well, it's got to be perfect. You know, I want to make sure that this note-taking guide is perfect. I want to make sure that this presentation is perfect. And we allow an awfully lot of time. And what happens to the work? It expands to the amount of time available for its completion. If you are a perfectionist, follow the perfectionist rule. The perfectionist rule says simply, do it in 50% of the time. Or do it in something significantly less than what you think it will take you. You know, that works. I remember a number of years ago, I was developing my first program in the time management area. And I realized there were going to be 12 lessons in that program, and I wrote lesson 1. And I won't tell you how long it took me to write lesson 1, but I'll tell you this, if it took me that long to write the rest of the lessons, I wouldn't have the program done today. I said, wait a minute, Jim, you got to start applying some of the principles that you're teaching. So I applied the perfectionist principle. I said, lesson 2 you're going to do in 50% of the time. I got it done in 50% of the time. Was it up to my standards? No. I'll admit it was not quite up to my standards. But the next day I stepped back and I looked at lesson 2 and I said, wait a minute, all I need to do is rearrange this a little bit, change that, and with a little bit more time, I got it up to those standards. And it was a lot less time than it took me. And I did that with every single succeeding lesson, and I found that if we force ourselves, we perfectionists, force ourselves to get it done in less time, it can make all the difference in the world. Principle number 4, control paperwork. Oh, a management's nightmare. Paperwork, I don't know about for you. It's not the in basket or the out basket that gives me a problem. It's that not quite in and not quite out basket. And what do you do with that? And paperwork gets all over the place. Now, if there was one, you know what I'm talking about, huh? If there was one principle that we would say that would apply to all handling of paperwork, what would it be? I'd suggest that it be handle each piece of paper only once, whenever possible. Obviously, there are some situations where you can't, but handle each, make that a rule in your life. Handle each piece of paper only once. If you follow that simple rule, it will provide great dividends for you in handling paperwork. Let me suggest that there's a way that you can look at that. I think in terms of my paperwork as a 3-pile or a 3-category system. Now the first pile, and actually I'm not talking about putting them in piles, but the first category is what I call those things that you can take action on immediately. What should you do with those things? Take action on them immediately and have yourself in an environment when you do. Sometimes I don't look at the mail first thing in the morning or the incoming paperwork. I'll do it at a time when I can concentrate, when I can accomplish what I want, when I can dictate if that's what's required, when I can write a hand note if that would be more practical back to the individual, where I could pick up the telephone and respond to them, so that in every case where I can possibly do it, those things that can be handled only once are handled. Now I realize that some of your incoming paperwork doesn't fall into that category. There's a second category, and that we'd call the pending category. Perhaps you get a letter or a memo that requires the meeting that's going to take place next week before you can respond to it. In that situation, what you want to do is have your systems set up so that that goes into an appropriate pending file, and somewhere on your calendaring system, whatever it is that you use, a note is made so that next Thursday, following that meeting, you then know where to get that letter and properly respond to it. But you see, it's not set over here on your desk to create another pile and to create litter, and you're going to try to remember that it's over there. No, you've got a system that enables you to handle that. The third category is the category that ought to go immediately into the basket. Now, you know, that's one of the most difficult categories, however, isn't it? Because you say to yourself, wait a minute, just might need that sometime. I know you, don't I? Yeah, I feel the same way. Several years ago, I found an additional suggestion that's helped me very much in that area. It's called a pending drawer. A pending drawer. That's exactly for those items that you say, you know, maybe I might need that, but it's not worth taking the time to file it someplace. But I don't want to throw it away because of the anxiety it would cause me if I throw it away. So you have one drawer in your desk or in your credenza that you have my permission not to throw it in the basket or to file it because it takes too much time to file. You can throw it in there, and you know that if you ever really need it, it's in there. You know what happens? About once a month, I go to my pending drawer, and most of it I'll dump out. My pending drawer, incidentally, is a little bit more advanced. In the back, I have the things that I want to keep for a longer period of time, but most of them get dumped very quickly. It is simply a system that saves time and saves anxiety on your part. There's one final suggestion that I'll make to you, and that's a to-be-read file. I keep it right in my briefcase because many times you get things that don't necessarily have any urgency, but you'd sure like to be able to read them and know what's in them. But if you never got around to them, maybe it wouldn't make too much difference. They go into my to-be-read file, and whenever I get put on hold on the telephone, whenever I'm traveling in an airplane or in some other way that I can divert my attention, whenever I'm resting and relaxing and would like to get to that stuff, I know right where it is, and I can go to it and accomplish what I want. The fifth suggestion. I think I can best describe this one with an example. It's a very personal example to me. A secretary who worked for me many years ago. It was a holiday Sunday afternoon, and I got a telephone call. And it was Linda, and her voice was trembling on the telephone. I knew there was a problem. She said, "Jim, we've had a serious automobile accident, and we've lost Michelle." Michelle was Linda's 13-year-old daughter. I don't know about you, I'm not very good in that kind of a situation. I tried to comfort Linda. I assured her that my wife and I would be there as quickly as we could get there. It was a few miles from our home, the hospital where they were. Linda was not hurt. Her son was not hurt. But unfortunately, her daughter was in such a position in the car that she was killed instantly. Now, let me make a long story short here. I watched Linda over the course of the next couple of weeks, and I was amazed. I was amazed at the strength that she had in facing that tremendous adversity in her life. I thought, good heavens, if that was one of my children, I don't think I'd be able to stand up the way Linda stood up. So I asked her, I said, "Linda, how were you able to be so strong?" She said, "Well, Jim, you know, I type all of the material that you do, and you talk about balance in an individual's life. And that was about a year ago," she said, "and I looked at my relationship with my daughter, and I didn't have the kind of a relationship that I should have with my daughter. And I analyzed my time, and I realized I wasn't spending the time that I should spend with my daughter. And so a year ago, I changed my priorities. I changed my plans. And I set myself up as the mother that I always wanted to be. And I developed the relationship with Linda that was so very important to me." She said, "That's why I feel the peace that I feel now." So the fifth principle is have balance in your life. I challenge you as an individual, I challenge you as a manager to take the time to complete that time log, and about once every 6 months, determine just how you are spending your time. And is that the way you want to spend your time? Principle number 6 is fulfill your white-hot imperative. Write that down and let me explain what I mean by it. Your white-hot imperative. Much of the research that we've been doing recently with individuals indicates that those high-achieving individuals are different in at least one significant way from those people who achieve less in their life. They have found something that really gets them excited, and they allow themselves to be fulfilled in that area. Now, I don't know what that might be for you, It may or may not relate to the business area of your life. Let me give you a few examples. I have a daughter, for instance, whose white-hot imperative is dance. She's a ballerina. She loves it. She probably has no more academic ability than the rest of my children, but she gets straight A's because she's driven by that power toward perfection that she demonstrates in her dance, but she demonstrates it in every other area of her life. An interesting thing happened recently. She went off to college, got kind of out of the dance environment. Lo and behold, her grades began to slip a little until she realized that she was not fulfilling herself in the most important area for you, for her. I challenge you as managers to figure out what is the most exciting thing in your life. Please underline exciting. That's what the white-hot imperative is. It's not necessarily the most important thing. It might be something that other people look at and say, hey, that's not important. But it is to you. It might be, as we found it with some of our clients, bird watching. It might be competitive racquetball. It might be anything that happens to fulfill the most exciting thing in your life. I challenge you to look for it, to find it, and to give you the time to fulfill it. And I guarantee you, you'll be a better manager because of it. Item number 7. I believe that we can learn a lesson from the old logger. Now, I come from logging country, and there's a legend there of this old logger who could cut more trees and stack more wood than anybody else. He was getting up in age at this particular point in time, and there was a young logger who felt like he could beat this old logger in a contest. He had worked hard building up his endurance. He was about twice the size of this guy, and the guy was close to retirement age. He was confident that he could beat them. As they began the challenge that day, where they were going to cut wood and see how much was stacked, the young logger was even more confident as the day went forth, because he would occasionally look over and notice the old logger and see him sitting there on a chair resting. The young logger rested very little. At the end of the day, he was confident that he had won. But lo and behold, when they totaled the amount of wood that had been cut and stacked, the old logger again had won the contest. The young logger came up to him and he said, "This doesn't make sense." He says, "I'm in such good shape. You're close to retirement age." And he says, "Also, I noticed that you were periodically resting while I was working." The old logger raised his finger. He said, "Oh, it's true that I was resting," but he says, "Perhaps you didn't notice. There were 2 other things that I was doing as I rested." He said, "First of all, I sat there and I looked ahead of me in the woods, and I saw which trees should be cut and which way they should fall for easy stacking." He said, "It's amazing how much more work you can get done when you take the time to plan." Managers, are you taking the time necessary to plan your work so you can be like that old logger? And then he raised a second finger. He said, "There was another thing that I was doing, and perhaps you didn't notice it, but as I sat there, I had a little file, and I was sharpening my axe." He says you can get a lot more wood cut with a sharp axe. I challenge you as managers to continue doing exactly what you're doing at this very minute. You are sharpening your axe. When you take the time to plan and sharpen your axe, it makes all the difference in the world. The 8th and final point, expect what you want from your people, can perhaps best be explained with an example. I remember a company long ago did an interesting study. They wanted to determine what made some of their people successful and other people not successful. They called in a research team and they studied those people. They looked at every characteristic that might be attributable to success. They finally came with the results. They said there is one characteristic that we always seem to find in your very successful, productive managers that is not found in those that are on the other end of the spectrum. Now, if we were to brainstorm, I'm sure you'd come up with a lot of different ideas in regard to what that was. I was surprised when I found out they said your successful managers believe that they are going to be successful. Your less successful people do not believe they're going to be successful. The point here is we as managers need to expect the best from our people, because our people will grow only as great as they can see themselves growing. The greatest limitation that any of us have are the limitations that we place upon ourselves because of the way that we think. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Man becomes what he thinks about all day long." A powerful statement, but true. We get about what we expect to get. William James, one of the great thinkers of our day, said the greatest discovery of our day, think of all the great discoveries we've had, he said the greatest discovery of our day is that man can change what he is by changing his attitude of mind, by changing the way that he thinks. The Bible puts it in an interesting way. It says something like this: whatsoever a person believes in their heart, so are they. Again, we get about what we expect to get. We get out of our employees about what we expect to get out of our employees, and we can help change that self-concept that they have, that they see they can accomplish more. Does anyone recognize the name Walter Russell? No one does in the entire group. Then it was Jim Hennig who said, no, I won't do that. All these great people making these wonderful comments. Walter Russell, incidentally, was a great genius, a genius in a number of areas. He made a powerful statement, just 6 words, but it's very powerful. He said, mediocrity is self-inflicted. Genius is self-bestowed. Now, here was a genius that realized his ability to perform as a genius was in part due to his believing that he could accomplish those things. I think the best example that I've ever seen of this happened to me a number of years ago. A gentleman came up to me out of an audience and said, "Jim, I must share with you an experience that I had." He said, "I'm a high school teacher. I want to tell you about Tom and Bill. The reason I tell you about these 2 boys is that we gave all the students in the school that year a test, and I got the results back. Tom was a straight A student. Bill was a D student. They were kind of at the opposite ends of the spectrum. But when I got the results of the test, I couldn't believe it. Tom, the straight A student, scored in the lower 1/3 nationally in terms of his basic intelligence. Bill, on the other hand, the D student, scored in the upper 5%. Then the teacher went on. He said it was my job to call the students in individually and explain the scores. He said when I shared that with Tom, Tom said, "Lower 1/3?" He said, "That doesn't make sense." He says, "Ever since I can remember, my parents have been telling me how smart I am. My teachers have been telling me how smart I am. I thought it was easy for me to get A's. I had no idea I'm in the lower 1/3. He went out rather disillusioned with a greatly changed what? Self-concept of what his mental ability was. And then the teacher said, "You know what happened to that boy's grades over the course of the next semester? They began going down and down and down because he had changed his self-concept." Now, he said the reaction was just the opposite with Bill. When he called Bill in, Bill said, "Upper 5%? Me?" He says, "You know, my parents have always told me how dumb I am. My teachers have told me how dumb I am. I thought for me to get C's would be good for me. I had no idea I'm in the upper 5%. And he too walked out of that office with a tremendously changed vision of what he could accomplish. And what happened to Bill? His grades began going up and up and up. And the teacher said, "I checked with all the other teachers that had these 2 boys, and they had never seen such a dramatic change." What was it based upon? It was based simply on the way those boys perceived their own ability to get the job done. I thanked that teacher. I said, "This is a great example." He says, "Wait a minute, I'm not through with the story." I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, at the end of the semester, the company that did the testing notified us that they had made a mistake. they had switched these two boys' scores. You see, it's not so much what happens to us in life or the basic talents and abilities that you or your employees have, but how we view those talents and abilities. Do you see how you as a manager can help raise the self-concept of those people with whom you work? And just like this graphic example with those two boys, they will increase their performance. I challenge you to expect the best out of your people. Communicate that to them. Expect that from them, and they will provide for you the best. It's not so much what happens to us in life as how we view what happens to us and the self-concept that we have as individuals and as managers.